For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for more updates.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. This is the show that examines policies and developments through the intersection of politics and economics to share a fresh perspective with you every week, especially in unpacking the underlying strategic imperatives. I'm your host, Anil Padmanabhan. According to official data, India has failed to generate sufficient jobs since the turn of the millennium. And this, despite the country logging one of the fastest rates of growth in this period to transform India into the fifth largest economy in the world. This paradox of jobless growth has been a source of perennial concern to India. Remember, generating jobs is a basic precondition to ensure political and social stability. Simultaneously, we also have the challenge of the quality of jobs being generated for the estimated 430 million workforce in the country. And then, in another twist to this story, there are others who argue that official data hides more than it reveals. For one, the regulatory burden incentivizes companies to keep their staff off the books. Secondly, the structural transformation of the Indian economy has possibly created jobs in sectors which are not yet being captured by official data. Third, it is almost impossible to capture the exact size of the informal economy. And this is significant given that bulk of the job creation today is in the informal sector. To understand this jobs riddles and more, we spoke to Rituparna Chakraborty. She is the co-founder and executive director at TeamLease, one of India's largest human resource companies. I began by asking her that is it really true that 90% of India's jobs are generated in the informal sector?
It's very difficult to pinpoint on what exactly is the figure, but I think we can by and large and safely conclude that the number is quite large still. And I think anywhere north of probably 88% of the workforce seems to be in the informal sector. Again, it's not that somebody can speak about this with confidence, but yes, looks like it, that large part of the population. But there's some interesting facts on that. The share of informal employment in total employment has decreased slowly from 88% in 1999-2000 to about 81%, and largely on account of the declining role of agriculture in total employment. But having said that, there has been some offsets because some of the other informal sector, I mean, I was actually reading this interesting report done by Mr. Ramnamurthy for IMF, which actually says that, you know, sectors like trade, repair, accommodations, and food services from 2011 till 2017-18 have seen a massive jump in terms of informal work. So there are other non-agricultural sector where there seems to have been a spike in an increase. Some say, and honestly, I will never claim that this is the final data, but some claim that from about 4.2%, it has gone up to about 9.5%. So, which has kind of offset the gain that we have seen on account of the decline in agricultural employment. So, but having said that, there have been offshoots in recent times and different kinds of cuts of data, which suggest that there has been some progress. And I was actually looking at that data as well. So from the perspective of formal employment per se, you know, we seem to have from 2011 and 2012 till that, from there 2017 and 18, gone up from about 7.6% to about 9.3%. So there is some north movement and the lead indicators are encouraging, but it's not enough to kind of move the needle in a big way. And also cumulatively, informal employment more or less seem to have been around that 88%.
Clearly, the size of the informal economy is daunting. I was curious to know whether the new idea of jobs was amplifying the estimates of labor in the informal economy. After all, today, most companies prefer contracts as opposed to tenure.
Yes, I think the definition and the percentage of what is informal workforce, unorganized labor are definitely very blurry and confusing. But in my mind, the simplest definitions and more economists today are leaning on that definition of an informal worker is one where the worker has no written contract of any form, doesn't have access to any kind of paid leave, health benefits, or social security. And I think that's right now the prevalent form of definition. Having said that, there is a dire need, to change the narrative around informal employment. So somewhere we believe that informal employment typically is an employment where an individual feels exploited and deprived and discriminated. Given the era that we live in today, I think that itself is becoming blurry. So I think there are many forms of livelihood. Let me use the word livelihood, which could be informal in nature, but doesn't mean necessarily that the individual feels deprived or denied, right? So unfortunately, in the narrative and the data collection process has still not evolved to be able to capture that some of the change in the world of work around these aspects. And it's a absolute imperative to look at the different forms of livelihood.
Rituparna is making two interesting points here. One, she's saying it is time to revisit the definitions. Second, she's arguing that not having the formal tag to a job does not mean that person is deprived. I asked her to explain with an example.
I mean, one can probably look at the earnings per month, overall earnings per month. It need not necessarily be like, for example, I know that there are many gig workers who end up earning much more than probably anybody who supposedly is in some kind of a formal work. There could be somebody who is self-employed in some form, right? Who's doing informal work but earns much, much more than somebody else. And I guess, yes, that person may not have the construct of social security, guaranteed benefit, health benefits. However, the person has more than made enough to cover for and pay for all of these for themselves, or subscribes to some autonomous, individual-specific schemes around these fronts, So I guess the world of work per se is changing, and hence the narrative should actually now stop revolving around informal employment per se as an employment that is not desirable for an economy. I mean, this needs further debate before we jump to that conclusion.
Rituparna is right. Today, social security can be decoupled from one's salary package. For example, one can opt to be a freelancer and then go out and buy the same benefits from the market.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the way I look at it, I think there are, like I said, the entire definition of an enterprise, the definition of work, definition of the basic policies of work, have undergone massive changes. So, for example, and then access has improved, technology has actually come in the way. I actually believe that our workplaces has become much more safer than what it used to be earlier. And some of the aspects which we are entitled to as workplace benefits, social security, health benefits, are on account of an era where workplace probably were not as safe or conducive, but all of that is changing fast. So, and the fact that there is much more democratic access for individuals. For example, I was recently very pleased to see that, and that there is a active promotion and an active awareness building happening, that you're not contributing. Let's say you are not somebody who is a regular full-time employee, and hence you are not actively contributing to a PF every month. And however, you can actually, as an individual, at any point start investing in NPS. So I think the fact that we have these multiple options available, and then there is a lot of innovation that I'm seeing in even healthcare benefits, for example, in terms of insurance and so on and so forth.
Another recent complication, particularly in the last decade, has been the growth of the gig economy. I was curious as to how this stacked up in our debate about the informal economy.
First and foremost, I think it's very important to understand what is gig economy, because there are multiple versions and impressions about what is gig. So many people believe that everything which is permanent, on roll is equal to formal employment, and everything else is probably part of the gig economy. I think, again, our views on this seem to be very colored today, and hence, first and foremost, it's very important to align ourselves as to what is the gig economy. Essentially, it's a great source of livelihood for those who are part of it. It's a great source of talent and skills for stakeholders who are availing of the work provided by gig workers. However, it's a livelihood option between two parties where there is no employer-employee relationship. And I think in India, we have seen definitely a steady growth. As a matter of fact, there are estimates, and I'm not very sure about the methodologies through which these studies were done, but it's claimed that there are about 6.8 million gig workers in the country, and from what I see, by 29-30, this number could go up to about 23.5 million. And actually, they could form a large part of the non-agriculture workforce as well, or rather, people engaged in the economy to kind of earn livelihood. And the gig economy per se, I think, somewhere straddles the edges of both formal and informal. So, and actually, I personally feel that this particular segment is what's going to compel us and force us to change our view on what's formal and informal. And hence, this is a space that we really need to watch out for.
There is an interesting twist to this tale, though. A recent survey by TeamLease reports that now managements are pushing for formalization.
There is a push in certain sectors more than in other sectors. We have seen that majority of the employers from FMCG, FMCD, healthcare, pharma, they seem to be more and more keen to kind of formalize. So, more than half of the employers we surveyed, almost 59% across the three sectors, tend to formalize the informal part of the workforce. And of all the employers who want to formalize the informal part, 37 and 36% are from FMCG and FMCD, and then about 27% from healthcare and pharma. The majority of them across these three sectors, almost 65%, admit that managing an informal workforce is becoming significantly more challenging. And the topmost challenge in engaging them is managing their wages part. And, and now when they say this, maybe they're not able to articulate it, or they choose not to articulate it, but the sword which keeps hanging around them in terms of wages. And to be honest, when skills are not widely available, they are realizing that it will become increasingly difficult also to engage and employ workforces through informal channels. Then skill gap, 21% actually is talking about the fact that there is a skill gap. And there is frequent absenteeism. These are probably the top three reasons that they feel that it's not worth it.
While the story may be true for a few sectors, In general, Indian companies prefer to fly under the radar to avoid regulatory scrutiny. In other words, they are incentivized to stay informal. Rituparna's colleague Manish Sabarwal had coined a moniker for this. He called it regulatory cholesterol. So I asked Rituparna the extent of this challenge.
Measure of the problem is humongous and completely out of tune with the 21st century India. I think take the scale. Out of the 63 million enterprises spread across India, there are only 1 million formal employers. And this essentially leads to the previous point that you were raising, that we all talk about creating good quality jobs, but it's essentially downstream from creating enough number of good quality formal employers in the country. The gap is still very huge on that front. More than 98% of Indian employers actually choose to stay small. As a result, they get no access to institutional credit, talent, technology, or supply chains. On the other side, they employ less than 3 people on an average, leading to less than optimal job creation.
Wow, 98% prefer to stay small. I asked Rituparna to elaborate.
This motivation to remain small actually has a sound survival logic. Now, these companies want to stay under the regulatory radar of laws and rules, uh, but ensure that they pay minimum wages, offer social security, or provide safe and hygienic working conditions, and not just this plethora of other laws. In labor laws alone, there are about 44 acts that we are talking, which needs compliance. This is not because at a central level only and at a state level, that number is humongous. This is not because they want to evade the political or societal objectives of the law, but because the clauses have become monstrous and they breach beyond manageable. So if the regulatory infrastructure can be eased to convert just 10% of its 63 million enterprises from informal to formal, 100 million new formal jobs can be created. However, the key binding constraint is what we call the regulatory cholesterol, a universe of about 1536 laws, 69,233 compliances, and 6,618 filings that businesses face as an aggregate.
In the conversation so far, Rituparna has been making a strong case to re examine all the existing narratives as she believes they're all sell past the date.
I think we have to revisit the very notion of how an enterprise looks. We have to revisit the notion of what the aspiration of an individual or the youth of the country is. We have to revisit the influence of digital technology as in some of the perceived risk challenges that we had seen earlier may have gone away with it. And hence, are we misplaced with some of the stipulations, regulations that we have in place? We really have to do something about the accuracy, efficacy, and transparency of data. Because if you don't have the right data, you will not be able to make the right decisions. And I think India has been plagued around this area. I don't think we are able to make the right choices, even at a policy making level. And by the time we make those decisions, I think the very premise on which it has been made becomes irrelevant. So, what is good work finally? I think that needs redefinition and relook. What is like, for example, good work is not necessarily formal work and vice versa. So I think there are much that we have to challenge. I mean, there no more enterprise doesn't consist of four walls anymore. Enterprise don't have fixed work hours. Demand comes from somewhere, supply comes from somewhere. So many things have to be challenged and revisited. Diversity also, we didn't speak too much today about diversity of workforce, but I think women labor workforce participation, for example, is a big issue. And I think over the last 1 year, we've actually gone south on that front. We've always been in the bottom few, and now we've kind of dropped that even further. So, and how that influences policy-making choices, how it influences workplace choices, how it impacts the economy. I think there are a lot of things that we need to revisit. And the fact that and the change is actually something that is very constant today. And if you're not going to change the circumstances, environment, rules, policies in line with that, and our views around that, we will always be left behind.
In the final analysis, it is clear that we have more questions than answers, which is actually not a bad thing. For one, India desperately needs to fix its data capture systems. At the moment, it is broken. Second, the traditional definition of jobs needs to be revisited, especially in a world that blurs the distinction between formal and informal. Third, the debate has to pivot towards the quality of jobs being generated. Fixing all of this is not going to be easy, but getting the first principles right is extremely important. After all, Rome was not built in a day, and neither was it without elaborate planning. As they say, one step at a time. That's all for this week. Thank you for watching. Do subscribe to Strat News Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please do share your insights and comments with us. I am available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.